every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The tide draws a breath. It is a slow, rhythmic exhalation of foam and salt water that crawls up the sand before retreating with a sigh. In the pre-dawn light of December 1, 1948, Somerton Park Beach in Adelaide, Australia, is a place of quiet transition. The last of the night's coolness is giving way to the coming oppressive heat of a southern summer day. The sky is a palette of soft gray and pale lavender, the air still and heavy with the smell of the sea and damp sand. This is a city shaking off the weariness of a global war that had ended only 3 years prior. A sense of cautious optimism hangs in the air, but the shadows of that conflict, and the new, colder one brewing in the north, are long. It is a place of immense, almost sacred peace. But against the seawall, in the shadow of the esplanade, lies a profound and disturbing stillness. A man is resting there, or so it seems. He is propped up in a posture of casual repose, a position one might take to watch the sunset. His head is tilted back against the rough concrete of the seawall, his legs extended and crossed at the ankle. He is impeccably dressed for a man on a beach, an incongruous sight against the gritty sand. A brown double-breasted suit jacket, a crisp white-collared shirt, a neatly knotted red and blue tie. His shoes, polished to a soft gleam, are clean, remarkably so, as if he had been gently placed there, avoiding any scuffs or sand. He looks like a commuter who simply missed his last train home and decided to wait for the morning. His left arm is bent at a right angle, his right arm extended straight by his side. There is an unsmoked cigarette resting on the collar of his coat, just below his cheek, as if it had fallen from his lips as he drifted into a deep sleep. To the casual observer, he is simply asleep. A pair of lovers had seen him the night before, around 7 o'clock, as dusk settled over the water. They saw him raise his right arm, a gesture that seemed weak and uncoordinated, then let it drop limply to his side. They assumed he was drunk, perhaps trying to light a cigarette and failing. It was not an entirely uncommon sight, and they thought little of it, continuing their walk. An hour later, another couple saw him, motionless in the dim light of the street lamps. They noted the swarm of mosquitoes around his face, undisturbed by any movement. They, too, assumed he was sleeping off a long night, dead to the world in a way that seemed both pitiable and slightly comic. They walked on. The city of Adelaide slept, its citizens in their beds, unaware that one of its temporary residents was not sleeping at all, but had slipped into a silence from which he would never return. It wasn't until 6:30 the next morning that the truth began to surface. A man named John Lyons, out for a morning ride with his horse, noticed the figure still propped against the seawall. Something was wrong. The posture was too rigid, the stillness too absolute, even for the deepest sleep. He approached, and in the growing light of day he saw what the darkness had concealed. This was not sleep. This was death. The police were called, and with their arrival, one of the most baffling and enduring mysteries of the 20th century officially began. The man had no wallet, no money, no identification of any kind. Every single label, from the tailor's mark on his suit to the manufacturer's tag on his underwear, had been meticulously snipped from his clothing. He was a ghost, a man who had seemingly walked out of nowhere, only to die on a quiet suburban beach, leaving behind a body that offered no name and a silence that would echo for generations. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a code. But this is not merely the story of a cryptic message written in pencil on a scrap of paper. It is the story of a far more complex cipher, the code of a man's life, deliberately erased, a code written in missing clothing tags, a ticket for a train he never caught, and a rare book that connected him to a woman who would deny him until her dying day. We will explore how investigators, for over 70 years, tried to break this code, a puzzle that hinted at everything from a secret wartime romance to the shadowy world of Cold War espionage. And we will trace the story to its modern-day conclusion, where the most advanced science of our time finally broke the first layer of the cipher, giving the ghost a name, only to reveal an even deeper mystery underneath. The first officers on the scene, Constable John Moss and his superior, were met with an unnerving tableau. The Somerton man, as he would come to be known, was a picture of health. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, around 5 feet 11 inches tall, with a 44-inch chest and a 31-inch waist. His physique was remarkable. He had high, well-defined calf muscles and wedge-shaped toes, physical traits often associated with athletes or dancers who spend a great deal of time on the balls of their feet. His hands were soft and uncalloused, showing no signs of manual labor. His fingernails were clean and perfectly manicured. He was a man who clearly took care of his appearance. His teeth were in good condition, but with some unusual dental characteristics, a condition known as hypodontia, with his canines missing next to his lateral incisors, that would later be used in futile attempts to identify him through dental records. There were no marks of violence on his body, no cuts, no bruises, no bullet holes. He looked as if he had simply stopped. His pockets were searched, yielding a bizarrely mundane collection of items for a man with no identity. There was an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, dated for the morning of November 30th. There was also a bus ticket from the city to the St. Leonard's bus stop in Glenelg, a stop located just a short walk from where his body was found. He had a slim aluminum comb, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit, chewing gum, a box of Bryant and May matches, and a packet of cigarettes. But this last item was peculiar. The packet was for Kenzita's cigarettes, a common, cheaper brand. Inside, however, were 7 cigarettes of a different, more expensive brand, called Army Club. This detail, seemingly trivial, was the first hint that something was being deliberately concealed or misrepresented. Why place expensive cigarettes in a cheaper packet? Was it a simple matter of preference, or was it a signal? In the world of espionage, such seemingly insignificant details, known as small tradecraft, can be a matter of life and death. The body was taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital for an autopsy to be performed by Dr. John Dwyer. The initial examination only deepened the enigma. Professor Sir John Burton Cleland, a respected and highly experienced pathologist, was also brought in to assist. Together, they peeled back the layers of the mystery, but found no simple answers. The man's last meal, a meat pasty, had been consumed 3 to 4 hours before his death, placing his time of death around 2 a.m. on December 1st. There was no sign of natural disease that could account for his sudden demise. His heart was normal. His other organs were generally healthy, but there were signs of a profound systemic shock. They found acute congestion everywhere. His stomach was deeply inflamed and hemorrhagic, with blood mixed with the remains of the pasty. The blood vessels in his brain, liver, and kidneys were engorged with blood. His spleen was swollen to 3 times its normal size, soft and pulpy. These were all classic signs of poisoning, yet comprehensive toxicology tests for all known common poisons, cyanide, arsenic, strychnine, carbon monoxide, came back negative. The coroner, Thomas Cleland, was baffled. He speculated that the poison might have been a fast-acting, difficult-to-detect substance, perhaps a barbiturate or a hypnotic. He favored 2 specific and rather exotic possibilities: digitalis or strophanthin. Both are cardiac glycosides, powerful drugs derived from the foxglove and strophanthus plants, respectively. In controlled doses, they are used to treat heart conditions. In high doses, they are lethal, causing rapid heart failure, while leaving behind minimal traces that would have been almost impossible to detect with the technology of 1948. Their symptoms, including massive internal congestion and edema, matched the findings of the autopsy almost perfectly. The mystery now had a potential cause of death, but it was a cause that raised more questions than it answered. These were not poisons one simply acquired. They were specialized clinical substances. Their use suggested a deliberate, calculated act, a murder designed to look like a natural death. The official coroner's inquest was a study in frustration. Witness after witness provided small, disconnected pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a coherent image. Professor Cleland testified to his strong suspicion of poison, but admitted he had no concrete proof. He stated, "I would be prepared to find that he died from poison, that the poison was probably a glucoside, and that it was not accidentally administered. But I cannot say whether it was administered by the deceased himself or by some other person." The inquest officially recorded an open verdict. The coroner stated, "I am unable to say who the deceased was. I am unable to say how he died or what was the cause of death. The Somerton man was officially a nobody, who died of nothing, for no reason." This legal ambiguity left the case in a state of permanent limbo. It was not officially a homicide, but no one believed it was a natural death. The effort to give him a name began in earnest, becoming one of the largest identification efforts in Australian history. His fingerprints were taken and sent to every state in Australia, then to New Zealand, Britain, the United States, and every other English-speaking country. The response was a resounding silence. No matches. A public appeal was launched, and a photograph of the man was published in newspapers across the country and eventually the world. This led to a flood of supposed identifications. Dozens of grief-stricken relatives of missing men came forward, only to leave disappointed. Each time a potential match was investigated, it was ruled out by fingerprints or dental records. The police were chasing shadows, and with each dead end, the man on the beach became more and more of an enigma. As the weeks turned into months, the man's body lay unclaimed in the morgue. The authorities, unwilling to simply dispose of the remains of a man at the center of such a perplexing case, made an unusual decision. They had him embalmed with formalin to preserve him for future identification, a process that would unfortunately degrade much of his DNA. They also commissioned a local artist to create a plaster cast of his head and torso, a ghostly white effigy that would become the face of this enduring mystery. This bust, with its strong jaw, high cheekbones, and calm, almost serene expression, would stare out from newspaper pages for years to come, a silent plea for someone, anyone, to give him back his name. The investigation was at a complete standstill. The man from Somerton Beach was a phantom, and every lead had dissolved into thin air. The first break, or what seemed like one, came more than a month after the body was discovered. On January 14, 1949, staff at the Adelaide railway station's cloakroom found a large brown suitcase that had been checked in at 11 a.m. on November 30th, the day before the man was found dead. The luggage tag had been torn off. The rail ticket found in the man's pocket indicated he had arrived in Adelaide by train that morning. The timing was a perfect match. When the police opened the suitcase, they felt a jolt of anticipation. Inside they found a collection of clothing: a red dressing gown, slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, and various shaving and toiletry items. But their hopes were quickly dashed. Just like the clothes on the body, every single identifying tag had been carefully removed from every garment. The man had not only erased his identity from his person, but also from his belongings. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a meticulous, planned act of self-effacement. However, the contents did offer some tantalizing clues. They found a stenciling kit, a brush, ink, and a zinc plate, of the kind used to mark cargo on merchant ships. There was also a reel of Barber brand wax thread, an unusual type not sold in Australia at the time, suggesting he had recently been overseas or was involved in sail-making or repair. An electrician's screwdriver and a pair of sharpened scissors hinted at a technical profession. Most intriguingly, they found a few items that the identity eraser had missed or perhaps left deliberately. On a tie, the name T. Keene was printed. On a laundry bag, Keene. And on a singlet, Keene, without the final E. The police seized on this name. Was this the Somerton man? They launched a search for any missing person named T. Keene. But the lead ran cold. No such person was reported missing. In fact, investigators later concluded that this was likely a red herring. If someone went to such extraordinary lengths to remove every single tag, why would they leave the only clues to their actual name? It was more likely, they reasoned, that the Keene tags were left deliberately to send investigators down a false path while the man's true identity remained hidden. The case went cold again. The Somerton man remained in his refrigerated drawer, and his plaster bust collected dust in a police storeroom. The suitcase, with its carefully detagged clothes, sat in an evidence locker. The mystery was becoming a piece of local folklore, a chilling ghost story told on summer nights. It seemed destined to be one of those perfect, unsolvable crimes. Then, more than 4 months later, came the discovery that would transform the case from a local puzzle into an international sensation. In April 1949, Professor Cleland, one of the original pathologists, decided to re-examine the man's clothing one last time before it was put into storage. He went over every inch of the trousers. As he felt along the waistband, his fingers detected a small, lumpen object sewn into a hidden pocket, a tiny fob pocket that had been missed in all previous searches. With a pair of scissors, he carefully snipped the stitches and retrieved a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper. When he unfurled it, he saw 2 words, printed in an elegant, ornate font, Tamám Shud. The words were foreign, and their meaning unknown to the Adelaide police. A call was put out to language experts and librarians, and soon the phrase was identified. It was Persian, and it meant "it is ended" or "it is finished." It was a phrase taken from the final page of a collection of poems called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. This was a stunning development, a suicide note, a final poetic flourish, or something more. Police identified the specific font as coming from a particular and rather rare 1941 edition of the book translated by Edward Fitzgerald, published by Whitcomb and Toombs in New Zealand. The book's themes of living for the moment in the face of oblivion, the moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on, seemed chillingly appropriate. A nationwide appeal was launched. Police urged the public to check their copies of the Rubaiyat to see if the final page with the words Tamám Shud had been torn out. The appeal ran for months with no success. The trail seemed to have gone cold yet again. But then, a man, whose name was kept confidential for years but was later revealed to be a chemist named Ronald Francis, walked into the Adelaide police station. He told an incredible story. Sometime around the end of November 1948, right about the time the Somerton man died, he and his brother-in-law had gone for a drive near Somerton Beach. He had parked his car, leaving it unlocked. The next day he discovered a book in the back of the vehicle that did not belong to him. It was a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Assuming it belonged to his brother-in-law, he thought nothing of it and tossed it into his glove compartment. It was only after seeing the police appeals months later that he retrieved the book and checked it. The last page was missing. The words, Tamám Shud, had been torn away. He had found the Somerton man's book. Forensic analysis confirmed it. The scrap of paper from the man's pocket was a perfect match for the tear in the book. The paper type, the microscopic fibers, it was a definitive link. But the book contained far more than just a missing phrase. When examined under ultraviolet light, the back cover revealed faint pencil markings that had been previously erased. There were 5 lines of capital letters. They appeared to be a code. The second line was struck through, as if it were a mistake. The lines read, WRGOABABD. Then the struck-through line, MLIAOI. Then 3 more lines, WT-BIMPANUP, MLIABOAIAQC. And finally, ITTMTSAMSTGAB. Beneath the code was something more tangible, a phone number. The discovery of the code and the phone number electrified the investigation. This was no longer just a case of an unidentified body. It was now a puzzle box of ciphers and secret contacts. The phone number was unlisted, which was unusual for the time. Police quickly traced it to a young woman, a former nurse, who lived on Mosley Street in Glenelg, a suburb less than half a mile from where the Somerton man's body was found. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though she went by Jo. She was 27 years old, a striking woman with a young son. When detectives arrived at her door and told her why they were there, she was, by all accounts, deeply evasive and distressed. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean, the lead investigator, showed her the plaster cast of the Somerton man's face. Her reaction was immediate and extreme. Lean later described her as completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint. She stared at the bust, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked, as Lean put it, as if she was seeing a ghost, yet when asked if she knew the man, she denied it. She denied ever having seen him before. Her denial was absolute, but her physical reaction told a very different story. The detectives pressed her about the copy of the Rubaiyat. She admitted that she had once owned a copy of that specific edition. She told them she had given it as a gift during the Second World War to a man she had met in Sydney while working at the Royal North Shore Hospital. His name was Alfred Boxall, an army officer in the water transport section. This was a major breakthrough. Alfred Boxall. Was this the Somerton man? Had he traveled to Adelaide to see Jessica, only to be rejected, leading him to take his own life on the beach near her home? It was a plausible, romantic, and tragic theory. The police immediately launched a search for Alfred Boxall. They found him, not in a morgue, but alive and working as an engineer in Sydney. When they interviewed him, he confirmed that he knew Jessica Thompson. And yes, she had given him a copy of the Rubaiyat. In fact, he still had it. He produced the book, and inside, Jessica had inscribed verse 70 for him. Indeed, indeed, repentance oft before I swore, but was I sober when I swore? And then came spring and rose in hand, my threadbare penitence a pieces tore. The police opened it to the last page. It was pristine. The words Tamám Shud were still there, intact. The Alfred Boxall lead, which had seemed so promising, had only deepened the mystery. The Somerton man was not Alfred Boxall, but he possessed a near-identical rare book, which he had seemingly discarded in a stranger's car. That book contained Jessica Thompson's phone number, and Jessica Thompson, who lived a short walk from the death scene, had a visceral, terrified reaction to seeing the dead man's face, yet swore she didn't know him. The coincidences were piling up to an impossible height. The police were convinced she was lying, that she was the key to the entire case, but they had no evidence to force the issue. She stonewalled them, offering no further information. Her name was kept out of the press to protect her privacy, and she receded back into the suburban anonymity from which she had briefly emerged. Taking her secrets with her, she would remain a figure of intense speculation for the rest of her life, the silent woman at the heart of an impenetrable mystery. With the human element of the investigation stalled, attention turned back to the most enigmatic piece of evidence. The code. The 5 lines of jumbled letters were submitted to the best minds in Australian intelligence. The Department of Defence, including its naval cryptographers, university linguists, and military codebreakers, all tried their hand. The results were unanimous. The code was unbreakable. At least, not without more information. The sample was too short to perform a proper frequency analysis, a standard technique for cracking simple substitution ciphers. It could be a more complex cipher, like a one-time pad, which uses a pre-shared key that is used only once, making it mathematically impossible to break. Or it could be something else entirely. Perhaps the letters were the first letters of words from a particular poem or document. Many have tried to link them to verses in the Rubaiyat itself, with little success. Or perhaps they were not a code at all, but the meaningless ramblings of a disturbed mind, a form of automatic writing. But the context of the era suggested a more sinister possibility. The year 1948 was the dawn of the Cold War. The world was fracturing into 2 hostile camps, and Australia, a key Western ally, was not immune. Just a few hundred miles north of Adelaide was the Woomera Prohibited Area, a top-secret Anglo-Australian military research facility. It was a place where guided missiles and atomic weapons were being tested. It was one of the most sensitive military sites in the Western world, and therefore a prime target for Soviet espionage. In fact, at that very time, the American Venona project was actively decrypting Soviet intelligence cables, and it had uncovered evidence of a major spy ring operating in Australia, with leaks coming from the Department of External Affairs. This was not a theoretical threat. It was a clear and present danger. This context cast the Somerton man case in a new, chilling light. The meticulously erased identity, the untraceable, sophisticated poison, the unbreakable code, the mysterious woman who refused to talk. These were not the hallmarks of a simple suicide or a crime of passion. They were the hallmarks of espionage. Was the Somerton man a spy? Was he a Soviet agent? Perhaps an illegal who had entered the country under a false identity? Was he supposed to meet a contact, perhaps Jessica Thompson, to pass on information, but the meeting went wrong? Or was he a defector, silenced by his former masters before he could talk? The stenciling kit in his suitcase suggested a connection to shipping, a common way for agents to move between countries undetected. The expensive cigarettes in the cheap packet could have been a recognition signal, and the code in the book could have been his final, desperate message. This theory, while impossible to prove, provided a framework that made sense of all the disparate and bizarre elements of the case. It transformed him from a tragic figure into a player in the great, dangerous game of nations, a casualty of a secret war fought in the shadows of places like Adelaide. For over 70 years, the Somerton man lay under a simple headstone in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. The inscription read, Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach. He was a local legend, a tourist attraction, and the subject of countless books, documentaries, and amateur investigations. The case seemed permanently frozen in time, but in the 21st century, a new kind of science emerged, a tool of investigation more powerful than any codebreaker or detective had in 1948, genetic genealogy, and a new investigator, a professor from the University of Adelaide named Derek Abbott, became obsessed with the case. Abbott was not a detective, but an engineer and physicist. He approached the mystery as a scientific problem, focusing on the code and the statistical improbabilities of the case. His investigation took a deeply personal turn when he began corresponding with, and eventually married, Rachel Egan, the granddaughter of Jessica Thompson, the mysterious woman from Glenelg. Through his wife's family, Abbott gained new insights. Kate Thompson, Jessica's daughter and Rachel's mother, revealed in a television interview that she believed her mother had lied to the police. She said her mother spoke several languages, including Russian, and had expressed sympathies for communism. She also claimed that her mother had once told her that the police were not as clever as they think they are, and that the truth was closer than you think. Kate even speculated that the Somerton man could have been her biological father. Her brother, Robin, had unusual physical features, such as the same rare ear structure as the Somerton man, that fueled this belief. This familial connection gave Abbott a renewed sense of purpose. He believed that the key to unlocking the entire mystery now lay in the one thing that had been unobtainable for decades: the man's DNA. For years, he campaigned for the exhumation of the Somerton man's body. His requests were repeatedly denied by the South Australian authorities, who cited public expense and the low probability of obtaining a usable DNA sample from remains that had been in the ground for so long, and, crucially, had been embalmed with formaldehyde, a chemical notorious for destroying DNA. However, Abbott and his team had another avenue. They had access to the plaster bust made in 1949. Embedded in the plaster, they found several microscopic hairs that had been caught when the cast was made. In 2011, they sent these hairs for DNA analysis. Unfortunately, the mitochondrial DNA they extracted was not enough to identify him, but it did allow them to trace his maternal lineage to a haplogroup common in Europe. It was a small step, but it was The push for exhumation continued, gaining public support. Finally, in 2021, the South Australian Attorney General, Vicky Chapman, granted permission. She stated that it was in case of intense public interest, and that modern science deserved a chance to crack it. In May of that year, the Somerton man's coffin was carefully raised from the earth. The exhumation was a delicate process, a race against time to recover any viable genetic material before it degraded further. Scientists from Forensic Science, South Australia, took charge, hoping to find fragments of bone or teeth from which they could extract a nuclear DNA profile. While the official forensic team began their slow, methodical work, Derek Abbott was pursuing a parallel investigation with a renowned American genetic genealogist, Colleen Fitzpatrick. Using the hairs from the plaster cast, they had managed, over many years, and with advancing technology, to build a partial DNA profile. It was not a full profile, but it was enough to begin searching genealogical databases. They uploaded the profile to sites like GEDmatch, a public database where people share their DNA results to find relatives. They were looking for distant cousins, anyone who shared a segment of DNA with the unknown man. It was like building a giant family tree in reverse. They started with thousands of potential matches and slowly, painstakingly, began to triangulate the data, identifying common ancestors and tracing their descendants down through the generations. It was a monumental task of digital detective work. Then, in July 2022, they had a breakthrough. After analyzing a family tree of over 4,000 individuals, they found a distant cousin on his mother's side and another on his father's side. By building the family trees of these two individuals down from their common ancestors, they found a point where the two family lines intersected. There was one person who appeared in both trees, a man with the right profile, who had been born at the right time and who seemed to drop off the historical record. His name was Carl Charles Webb. The announcement was stunning. After 74 years, the Somerton man had a name. Carl Webb was born on November 16, 1905 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne. He was the youngest of 6 siblings. He was an electrical engineer and an instrument maker, a profession that squared with the uncalloused hands and the technical tools found in his suitcase. He was married to a woman named Dorothy Jean Webb, but the couple had separated in 1947. She moved to Butte, South Australia, placing her in the same state where he would later be found dead. He had no children. He liked to bet on horses and write poetry, an interest that might explain his possession of the Rubaiyat. Suddenly, the ghost had a history. He was no longer the Somerton man. He was Carl Webb, a man who had lived, worked, loved, and lost. But giving him a name did not solve the mystery. In fact, it created a whole new set of questions. Why did Carl Webb, an instrument maker from Melbourne, travel to Adelaide in November 1948? Why did he go to such extreme lengths to erase his identity, even from his own underwear? What was his connection, if any, to Jessica Thompson? Researchers have scoured records, looking for a link, a shared workplace, a common acquaintance, but so far none has been found. Was it a wartime romance, or was it something darker, tied to the world of espionage? Webb's profession as an instrument maker could have given him access to sensitive technology or facilities. And then there was the question of his death. Did he die by suicide? His life finished, as the note suggested, perhaps despondent over his failed marriage. Or was he murdered, poisoned by an unknown hand for a reason that died with him on that beach? The name Webb provided no obvious clues to cracking the 5-line code. The letters did not seem to be an acronym for anything related to his name or life. The central enigma remained. The official identification is still pending confirmation from the forensic team that exhumed the body, but Abbott and Fitzpatrick's genealogical work is widely considered to be conclusive. They have given a man back his name, but they have not given him back his story. We now know who he was, but we still have no real idea why he was there. Why the secrecy? Why the code? Why the strange convergence of a rare book of poetry, an unlisted phone number, and a woman who would take her knowledge of him to her grave? Jessica Thompson died in 2007. And if she knew the truth about the man on the beach, she kept that secret perfectly. We began today by examining the anatomy of a code. For over 7 decades that code was seen as the jumbled letters in the back of a book, a cipher that guarded the man's identity. But the true code was the man himself, his manicured hands, his athletic build, the missing tags, the expensive cigarettes in the cheap packet. These were all characters in a cipher that described a life, but one we could not read. The incredible science of genetic genealogy has finally provided the key, cracking the code of his anonymity and revealing the name. Carl Webb. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to the persistence of science and the enduring human need for answers. Yet the story is not over. The other codes remain. The 5 lines of penciled letters are as inscrutable as ever. The code of his motive, what drove him to Adelaide and to that beach, is still locked away, and the most complex code of all, the one that bound him to Jessica Thompson, a code of shared history or secrets that made her tremble at the sight of his face, that code died with her. We have given the ghost a name, but the cause of his death remains, officially undetermined. We have unearthed a man from a forgotten grave, but his secrets remain buried with him. The words Tamám Shud on that scrap of paper signified an end, but the discovery of the name Carl Webb feels like a beginning. It is the start of a new story, the biography of a man whose final, most important chapter has yet to be written. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.